Hi guys, I've got the 2023 Standish lineup and I'm super excited to talk to you about it because I find that this lineup is such a good reflection of how terroir, so the environment the grape is grown in, actually influences the flavor profile on top of various different decisions that winemakers make. So these are all from the Barossa, all Shiraz, all aged in oak, and all undergo a process called whole bunch fermentation, but all very different wines. So we've got the Lamella, the Schubert Theorem, the Standish, and the Relic. So the Schubert Theorem, Standish, Relic are actually all on the Langton's classification. If you're not familiar with what that is, it essentially means that these wines have built up a track record of over 10 years of being collector favourites and performing well on the secondary market, so in those auction results. The Lamella actually hasn't become classified yet, but there's so much demand for this wine that I think it's probably likely that it will be included and join its friends in the next classification, but all very different wines. So let me talk you through them. So each are from the Barossa, as I've said, but the Lamella is the only one that's actually from higher elevation. It's from the Eden Valley. So when we have a wine that's at a higher elevation, altitude actually becomes a cooling influence. What that means is in a cooler climate, we're essentially able to lengthen the ripening period. It means that acid levels in the grape drop more slowly, sugar levels rise more slowly, and so we get a leaner wine, not less complex, but leaner, versus a warmer climate where we have acid levels drop really quickly, sugar levels rise really quickly, and sometimes that ripe flavor profile can actually step over into cooked fruits, that jamminess that's sometimes very typical of a Barossa and Shiraz. This one is not that. It's more reflective of a cool climate because of that longer ripening process and because of that altitude that becomes that cooling influence. This one, like the rest, goes through whole bunch fermentation, but it has 100% versus 50, 45, or 10%. So whole bunch fermentation is a technique that essentially gives more lift and vibrancy to the wine. But there's 3 different techniques within that broader technique or category. And the first is carbonic maceration. So basically what they do is they take all of the grapes, put them in a tank and pump it full of CO2. Now, because grapes actually have sugar in them, obviously, and there's yeast that's naturally occurring in the vineyard that also is on those whole bunches of grapes, it means that pumping in that CO2 means that we can actually kickstart the fermentation process. So if you've ever actually heard of wild yeast or wild ferment, it means that they're using the yeast that's naturally occurring in the vineyard in that fermentation process. And essentially because they're whole bunches of grapes, that fermentation is actually happening on an intercellular level, so within the actual grape. And once it gets to 2% ABV, so alcohol by volume, so it actually swells up and bursts essentially. And that bursting process means we're releasing more CO2. We have more of the sugar that's being released and gets in contact with the yeast on those whole bunches of grapes, and that continues that fermentation process. The second technique is semi-carbonic maceration. So basically we're semi-doing that process. So what we do is we get the whole bunches of grapes, we put them in a tank. Instead of pumping it with CO2, we let the weight of those grapes actually crush the ones below it. That then of course splits the grape, releases CO2. We get then the sugar from within the grape in contact with the yeast, and that fermentation process starts. The third is essentially we're kind of kick-starting that crushing process by essentially just throwing crushed grapes in with whole bunches, and then the process continues on. So 100%, 50%, 45%, 10%. This one, of course, being 100%, has more of that lift and vibrancy. The difference with the Schubert Theorem, which I'll move on to next, is all of them are oak aged, and so is the Schubert Theorem, but a portion of the wine in this actually is aged in a concrete egg. When we're deciding between which vessels, or when a winemaker is deciding between which vessels to age a wine in, the key question is, do we want it in contact with oxygen to change the flavor profile? Yes or no? If it's a yes, we're going to put it in oak because oxygen essentially gets through the oak and interacts with the wine. We also have different levels of toasting with oak barrels. The size, which adds more flavor, the size of the barrels depends on how much oxygen is then going to be proportionately in contact with that wine, which is then going to be changing the flavor profiles. If we don't want that interaction between oxygen and the wine to bring on more flavors, we would then decide to age that wine in an inert vessel. What that means is there's no oxygen contact. So we're either putting it in a sealed tank or a concrete egg, both of which don't have that oxygen contact coming in and changing the flavor of that wine. This one has a portion of concrete egg and oak age. So we're essentially getting the best of both worlds. What that means for the end result of this wine is that we've got more of that fruit purity, but this is such a bold, dark, velvety, plush, inky wine. It actually has a really nice drink window. They all do. The drink window for this one kicks off at 2030. For the Standish, it's 2035. For the Lamella, it's 2028. And for the Relic, I'm pretty sure it's 2026. But it's all on our website, all of those finer details. And they've got great long drink windows. The longest is the single-vineyard Standish, which actually has a drink window up to 2050. But the Schubert Theorem, coming back to that, I absolutely love it. I've got the 2022 open, which you can just see it's got that nice sort of dark color to it. It's got that plush sort of inky licorice, dark fruits. Like, it's just a beautiful wine. For me, it's everything I love about Barossa and Shiraz. And this one, I also just love the label. So it's difficult to see because it's in black, but there is actually a mathematical theorem on the label, and hence where the name comes from. It's actually named after the theorem of knot theory, which basically means, and it's very similar to the wine, that it becomes the sum of all of its different parts. So moving on to the Standish. This is the single vineyard, as I said, longest drink window and later starting. So 2035 it starts, goes up to 2050. You can always try wine after the drink windows. Sometimes they just have much more predominant tertiary flavors. So that's where the oxygen has been interacting more with the wine, and it brings on additional flavors, and we kind of over time lose those primary and secondary flavors. So primary are from the grape itself, secondary are from the winemaking process. The tertiary is essentially that interaction with oxygen with the wine over the bottle aging process. The only real difference with this one is single vineyard and old vines. So it's only aged in oak. It has the 45% whole bunch fermentation, but those old vines give it such power and structure. This one is meaty, it's gamey, it's more like your typical Barossa and Shiraz. And when we have old vines, what I love about them is you have less yield. So essentially the vine produces less grapes. And what that means is we have more flavor concentration per grape, because the vine essentially pushes all of its resources into a smaller amount of grapes. So we get that beautiful sort of concentration of fruit. And with the old vines as well, we've got that sort of meatiness, gaminess, the earthiness that really comes through. Beautiful, beautiful wine. Last, but definitely not least, is the Relic. This one has the lowest amount of whole bunch fermentation at only 10%. It's got the earliest drink window, I think, as I said, it was about 2026. It kicks off. This one is the only one in the lineup that actually has another grape in the blend. So it has 1% of Viognier, which is a grape white variety. And so this one is very reflective of the blends that we would get in the Rhone. So it's very Rhone style. So Rhone is an area in France that essentially focuses on a blend of Shiraz and Viognier. This one, obviously, from the Barossa, is a warmer climate than what we would get in France, but very Rhone style in terms of the combination of the grapes. But actually, because it only has 10% of whole bunch fermentation, the lift that we get in this is actually from the Viognier. And you can see the difference. It's got that nice lift and floral note that really brings out the vibrancy of this wine and softens those tannins. It is another beautiful wine. So all very different. And what I love about this, as I said at the start, is it's such a great reflection of how terroir, so the environment the grape is grown in, influences the flavor profile, but also the various different decisions that winemakers make. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a like, hit subscribe, more videos to come. And if there's any ones you'd love to hear about or topics you want to dive into, feel free to leave a comment. Cheers.